Have you kept some books from your childhood days that you just have cherished and you can't get rid of? I have. I am Judy Sheerwaters. Welcome to my channel. Here I bring you author interviews of ordinary people who had a story they needed to share with the world. I also bring you short little writing tips and writing prompts so that you can get those creative juices of your own going so that you can leave your stories for your generations to come. Because you know what? You have a story to tell. So let me help you tell it, okay? So I've gathered some of my cherished books. I think one of my first ones was Aesop's Fables. I just loved this, and I still do. I don't know if there's even a copyright date in this, but I think it was from my grandfather's library, or, I mean, he didn't really have a library, but he had books, and I think it was from Aunt Florence, his sister. And there is, yes, 1919 copyright on that. So it's fairly old. But I was so attracted to these pictures. I was not around in 1919, but, you know, here's a little coloration they did in 1919, which to me is quite interesting that they did that. I'll have to check and see when they started that. But I love those stories. As I mentioned, my Aunt Florence, she never married, and she sold books, childcraft books, in Chicago mostly, door to door, back in probably the 30s, 40s, something like that. And she always brought me a book. I don't know if she did that with all my other cousins, but she knew I loved to read. And this book, I don't know why it was so attractive to us, because we never traveled all these places, Thailand, Scotland. Well, I've been to Scotland now. Danube, I know she never traveled too far from her home, other than Chicago. But we would read this together. We never read the whole book, but, you know, it was interesting to see other lands and, you know, just to read that together. I really enjoyed that. And then some other books, I don't know if she gave them to me or not, but this is The Adventures of Bob White. I love The Adventures of Bob White. A little quail that had quite an adventure with his family. A few little illustrations there. That kept my attention, I'm sure. This one I know I read all the way through, but it was a primer. It wasn't something that, it did grab my attention, but I was very, very young. I remember reading this. I'm thinking I read it with my mom, and I don't know, there's no copyright in this at all, but little pictures in it, and it would have a vocabulary list at the end. So it was more of a school book, and I really don't know where it came from, but I remember reading the whole thing. And again, I do think that was with my mom, and the few times she had to really sit down and read with me. Hardy Boys, I read a lot of Hardy Boys. I read a lot of Nancy Drew, but I don't have any of those books. I think I probably checked those out of the library downtown. But the Hardy Boys, when I went to write my own mystery book a couple years ago, I read this one again, just to get me kind of in that frame of mind of what a middle school person or early high school would read. And I find that, you know, this was, of course, written a long time ago, well, 1953. So the language is different, the slang is different. So, but anyway, it really did help me and get me into that mystery writing realm genre. This one is not a read-through book, but I loved it. It's the America Quiz and Answer book. And a few times, I remember Daddy, my father, this is dated 1941, but he would just ask different questions of us kids. A lot of them we didn't know. A lot of them he knew. He was a very intelligent guy. But in just hearing the question and then hearing the answer, we learned. Silly things like, well, some things like, how many times did Admiral Perry try to reach the North Pole before he succeeded in 1909? On January 12, 1937, a famous explorer was killed when a passenger plane hit a mountainside near Burbank, California. Who was he? There are religion quizzes, there are history quizzes, U.S. miscellaneous, Pan America quiz, all different things. South American miscellaneous quiz. How much of South America has been surveyed? By what name is the Argentine cowboy known? What is typical of Latin American homes? So, like I said, it was just very interesting to hear the answers to all those questions that I hadn't even asked yet. This book is a favorite of mine, and I don't think I'll ever get rid of it. My daughter, when she was in 6th or 7th grade, we read it together. She took a turn at a chapter, and then I would read. It was every night before she went to bed, and we read through it. It's a pretty thick book, but we love this book. Like I said, I'll never get rid of this because it's just great memories came with it too. Memories that I have of my daughter reading with me, or my reading with her at bedtime. Memories of my Aunt Florence tied to those books. Memories of my mom. Memories of my dad. All tied with different books. And this brings me to your writing prompt today. So think of the books from your past. Oh, one book was Heidi. I loved Heidi. Heidi, I think my sister and I read through Heidi together. Loved it. And I know I have that here somewhere, but who knows where. I think it's in my daughter's room. But, okay, now, I digress again. But your prompt for today. Think about those books that you read as a child, or maybe a teenager. Maybe you didn't like to read. Maybe you were forced to read. I don't know. But I know every chance I got, I could get up in the big old tree, we called Old Faithful, and with a book, and I would read. But I know you read something in your childhood, in your high school days, maybe in your early adulthood days, maybe just recently, that stuck with you. Maybe it's because of course, the subject matter. Maybe it's because of who is tied to that book, who gave it to you, what kind of memory of that person comes back to you when you read it or when you think of that book. So your prompt for today is just that. Write down, it doesn't have to be a whole list of books like I've given you here, but write down maybe 3 or 4 books that really have stuck with you up here, even though you may not have the book itself. But write a list of books that really were meaningful to you. And in what way? Then write, how are they meaningful to you? Your generations to come will have their own list of books. And it'll be fun for them to go back and look at your list of books and how they affected you. I think about things like the Bob White story and how it affected me. And it's still the story itself and the dangers that he had to keep his family from. It's always getting his family away from the fox and building a new nest a long, long ways away from where he had first felt comfort. That was meaningful to me. And I today remember that whole plot and what Mr. Bob White had to go through. So write this down, get it written down. It doesn't have to be long. It doesn't have to be 2, 3, 4 pages. Just 1 paragraph. Just start there. But do start, because that's important. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope that you have seen others of mine. Go ahead and click that little like button down there if you do, and share my video with friends who you think would enjoy getting started with writing their own stories for their generations to come. Also, leave me a message if there's something, maybe you want to tell me a little story of one of your books that you cherished. That's great. I would love to hear it. So, leave a message, leave a comment there, and I reply to everyone who comments, who leaves a comment. So, anyway, until next time, I'm Judy Shearwaters. You have a story to tell. Let me help you tell it.